Welcome to the Edison Electric Institute 2021 Electric Power Industry Outlook. My name is Devin James, and I'm the Senior Manager of Investor Relations and ESG at EEI. I will be your moderator for today's Wall Street briefing. Thank you for joining. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items. As you all know, EEI and its members are committed to full compliance with all laws and regulations and to maintaining the highest ethical standards in the way we do business. This commitment includes strict compliance with federal and state antitrust laws. We have provided guidelines outlining EEI's antitrust compliance policy and procedures. Please take a moment to review those guidelines and follow them throughout this meeting. We will begin our program with remarks from EEI's leadership team. Following the remarks, we will begin the live audience question and answer session. Questions can be submitted via the text box. And now, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's briefing. We will be joined by Tom Kuhn, the President of EEI, Brian Wolfe, the Executive Vice President of Public Policy and External Affairs, Philip Moeller, the Executive Vice President of the Business Operations Group and Regulatory Affairs, and Rich McMahon, Senior Vice President of Energy Supply and Finance. The additional members of EEI's leadership team that will be joining our briefing for the question and answer session today are Emily Fisher, who serves as the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary and Senior Vice President of Clean Energy, and Scott Aronson, who is the Vice President of Security and Preparedness at EEI. We will now begin our formal presentation with opening remarks from EEI's President, Tom Kuhn.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to EEI's annual briefing on the state of the electric power industry. I'm Tom Kuhn, President of EEI, and I look forward to this event every year. EEI has been holding these briefings for more than 40 years, but this year marks a first. We are coming to you virtually. I certainly would prefer to be with you in person, but our virtual platform does provide us the opportunity to welcome even more guests. We have a terrific turnout, and I thank you all for being with us. Last February, when we held this briefing, none of us could have imagined the severity of the global pandemic that was on the horizon. This past year has been unprecedented, and it has been tough. If we have learned anything as a nation and as an industry, it is that we need to be ready for any challenge. We need to stay flexible, be innovative in our business practices, embrace change, and most important, be resilient. Time and time again, we have been reminded of the value of reliable and affordable electricity to our society and to our everyday lives, particularly now that our homes have become both workplaces and classrooms. I could not be prouder of the way our industry has responded to the pandemic and to all the challenges we have faced over the past year. Like we do in every crisis, we quickly adapted to very adverse circumstances and have worked around the clock to keep the lights on while protecting the health and safety of our employees. Our members have recognized that so many are facing extraordinary burdens. They have helped small businesses and individuals who are really struggling. And they have given back in so many ways to the communities and the customers they are privileged to serve. We have said time and again that we are powering through together. On the operational side, EEI and our member companies have demonstrated a strong and united front since the pandemic began. We have come together to plan for the many extra steps that had to be taken to ensure safety, resilience, and readiness. Early in the pandemic, by working with our government partners, we ensured that our frontline workers were designated as mission essential. We also stood up a team to develop COVID-19 protocols for emergency power restoration. What started as an 8-page industry overview quickly grew into a comprehensive resource guide. Today, the 10th version of our guide is more than 120 pages long. It has been translated into other languages and shared broadly with our international member companies in 90 countries across the globe. The protocols we developed certainly were put to the test last year as we confronted historic and devastating hurricanes, wildfires, derechos, and ice storms. Time and time again, our industry's mutual assistance networks were activated, and they responded in force, even during a pandemic. I always say that it's when disasters hit that our industry's deep commitment to service shines brightest. Thomas Edison once said, "What you are will show in what you do. What you are will show in what you do." Our member companies and our workforce were tested repeatedly throughout 2020. In every instance, they came through with flying colors. Their courage, commitment, and capability for doing so much so well inspires us. We will look to their example as we engage on the many exciting opportunities that we see in the year ahead. I will now spend just a few minutes outlining EEI's priorities for 2021 before turning to my colleagues to discuss these in more detail. As always, our North Star is serving our customers, and we will continue to center our efforts on 3 main pillars: maintaining the steady and strong transition to clean energy, modernizing the energy grid to make it more dynamic, more resilient, and more secure, and developing the innovative solutions our customers expect and deserve. One of the issues we are most excited to talk about today is our clean energy leadership. For President Biden and his administration, addressing climate change is a top priority. EEI's member companies are well positioned to be part of the climate solution, and we want to be part of the climate solution. We are so encouraged that there are more policymakers on both sides of the aisle who want to advance clean energy and electric transportation. And we look forward to working with them in the coming weeks and months on collaborative, innovative, and bipartisan solutions. In addition to clean energy, we are also focused on many other industry issues. First, the coronavirus remains a deadly adversary. The vaccines certainly give us hope, but there's still a long road ahead. As I look for the light at the end of the tunnel, I am certain our industry will play a critical role in supporting our customers and our nation as we recover from the pandemic. We are the nation's most capital-intensive industry, and we will continue to make significant investments in smarter energy infrastructure to support our clean energy transition. These investments create jobs and provide economic support to our communities. The transmission system is key to integrating more renewables and more clean energy into the energy grid affordably and reliably. EEI's member companies are vital to transmission development, and we look forward to working with the administration and key federal agencies to get this critical energy infrastructure built more quickly. Grid resilience and cybersecurity will remain front and center as always. And as we do every year, we will apply the lessons we learned from the last storm and wildfire seasons to improve our response and recovery efforts going forward. We also have a tremendous opportunity this year to help bridge the digital divide and to provide critical education and economic development opportunities to underserved communities through investments in middle-mile broadband. Finally, there's a real prospect for major new tax legislation, and we will be educating Congress on the impact that significant tax increases on corporations and dividends would have on our customers. Through all of this, we will remain focused on advancing social and racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion across our workforce and throughout our communities. Having a diverse and inclusive workforce that mirrors the communities we serve benefits our customers, our employees, and our businesses. A diverse workforce and diversity of thought also are critical to delivering the energy solutions our customers need and expect today and for generations to come. Our presentation today is information-packed, and we look forward to continuing our robust dialogue and to answering questions at the end of the session. What I hope you take away from our briefing today is that EEI and our member companies are committed to clean. This commitment underlines everything, and it is an immense part of our value proposition. My colleague Brian Wolfe will highlight our clean energy progress and vision right after this video.
We are a society that values cleanliness. We sanitize, bleach, scrub, wash our dogs, brush our teeth. Yeah, we love our teeth. We just plain feel better when we're clean. The same is true for the world we live in. We all want and deserve clean air, clean water, and clean energy. And we're already making progress. Today, almost 40% of the electricity that powers our homes and businesses comes from clean, carbon-free sources. With new technologies and the right policies, a 100% clean energy future is possible for all of us. America's electric companies are committed to getting the energy we provide as clean as we can, as fast as we can, without compromising reliability or affordability. For us, the path forward is clear. The path forward is clean.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Wolfe, Executive Vice President of Public Policy and External Affairs at EEI, and I'm excited to be with you today to discuss our clean energy vision. I really wish we were together in New York. Doesn't matter if it's snow, sleet, ice, doesn't matter. I wish we were all together. As you heard from Tom, EEI's member companies, we're leading the way in clean energy, and we're committed to getting the energy that we need and provide as clean as we can, as fast as we can, without compromising the affordability and reliability that we know our customers expect and they value. Let's talk for a few minutes about the progress we're making. Many of you already know that we're at almost 40% of all of the electricity in this nation comes from carbon-free resources, including nuclear, hydropower, wind, and solar energy. And carbon emissions from the US power sector are already at their lowest in almost 30 years, and they continue to fall. And collectively, EEI's member companies are reducing their carbon emissions at least 80% by 2050 compared to 2005 levels. And some are actually reducing their emissions even further and even faster than that. I think the switch from coal to natural gas, we can all recognize that that switch from coal to natural gas and renewable energy has been the single most effective tool over the past decade for reducing carbon emissions. Over the last 15 years, the use of coal has dropped by almost 50%. And just over the last 5 years, battery storage deployment has increased by almost 400%. Solar deployment by 216%, and wind deployment by almost 60%. And I think we have to look at this, and we need to be doing this, keeping rates for our customers steady. That's what we've been focused on. That's what we're doing. And while we're ensuring that that electricity that I said before remains affordable and reliable for our customers. And as impressive as that progress sounds to you, I know it sounds awfully impressive to me, but we really need to lean in and accelerate those efforts, and now is the time to do it. With the right policies and the right technologies, 100% clean energy future, it's not really just a goal for us anymore, it's really a reality for all of us. and a reality I think that all of us really embrace. Our experience shows there's no one-size-fits-all approach solution that meets our energy needs of a country as large and diverse as ours. So I think it's important for us to lead on clean energy in a way that gives us all the options. We need to make sure that we maintain existing nuclear. When we think about that, that's the largest portion of our clean energy that exists today, along with renewables. And we still need to be able to use natural gas to achieve those clean energy targets and actually achieve them and accelerate that clean energy deployment. Wind, solar, energy storage can get us much of the way. We all know that for a carbon-free future. But I think we've also learned that keeping nuclear in the mix and keeping actually natural gas in the mix will only make it faster and actually more reliable. So while there's much the power sector can, and we're certainly going to be doing a lot more to reduce emissions in the near term, we need to pick up the pace, though, on technology if we want to achieve deep carbon reductions. It takes time to successfully develop, test, and integrate the new technologies we know that we'll need to eliminate that last 10 and 20% of emissions. We need to start now. So at the beginning of last year, EEI partnered with a number of leading environmental and energy policy groups on a carbon-free technology initiative. And through this initiative, we're working to really identify and advocate for specific policy proposals that can help ensure the commercial availability of 5 key technology areas early enough so that they can be deployed in a timely manner to meet net zero reduction goals and ensure electricity, as I've said, remains affordable and reliable. Ultimately, I think that these technologies are driving the timeline, and the federal policy will be a catalyst of the innovation that we really need to achieve our ambitious goals. Going forward, our member companies will all continue to make significant carbon reductions. But to meet our long-term energy and climate goals, we need these supportive policies that I've mentioned. It's critical that Congress appropriate money toward the further development and research and demonstration and deployment of new, affordable 24/7 carbon-free technologies. We know that the omnibus spending bill that actually passed in late December provided a down payment. I call that a down payment on needed investment. Much more investment is needed, but more is going to be required to accelerate the drive towards zero emissions. We all need policies that support our clean energy transition, including getting critical transmission and energy grid infrastructure built more quickly. I know my colleague Phil Moeller, that follows me here, will talk about clean energy infrastructure and what's really needed along the siting and permitting of those to further accelerate clean energy deployment. We know that these policies should recognize the key role that electrification also plays in helping to reduce carbon emissions cost effectively in other sectors of the economy, and particularly the ones I'm talking about are industrial and transportation sectors. Our position is and always has been that we need to take an economy-wide approach to addressing climate change. The transportation sector is the largest domestic source of carbon emissions now, and it actually has been over the last 5 years. By accelerating transportation electrification and increasing the number of electric vehicles in the federal fleet and on the US roads, we can leverage the already ongoing emission reductions in our own sector to meet economy-wide carbon reduction goals. Today, more than 1.6 million cars, EV cars, are on the road, and that number is projected to grow to 18.7 million over the next 9 years. So we're going to need about 9.5 million charging stations just to be able to support that many electric vehicles on our roads. EEI member companies are already investing. I think to date now, we've invested over $2.5 billion to deploy charging infrastructure and to accelerate electric transportation and that adoption. It's important really that all communities have access to the benefits of EVs, and our member companies are investing in disadvantaged and underserved communities in electrifying car share and public transportation system that serve those who do not own vehicles or may not ever own an electric vehicle. And in electrifying actually commercial vehicles like delivery trucks that operate in these neighborhoods, we'll even see further reductions. Each community is probably going to have, when you think about it, a different model that works best for them. But providing the flexibility that we know is important, we know that it's going to ensure that these communities can participate in charging programs leading to more EV charging stations across the country. I'm proud to say that our members are really leading by example, and collectively we're on track to electrify more than 1/3 of our fleets by 2030. And I think our companies are gaining critical experience along the way with doing this and learning best practices, what works, what doesn't work, that are really going to be able to help our customers design and implement their own fleet electrification plans, particularly with our commercial and corporate customers. With such razor-thin majorities in both chambers of Congress, the prospects for big clean energy legislative packages addressing carbon reductions are uncertain, and we know that much of the action may be destined for the regulatory arena. So since Inauguration Day, we know that President Biden has issued a series of clean energy related executive orders to address climate change. And EEI has voiced our support for rejoining the Paris Agreement to achieve really meaningful worldwide action on climate change. We know that it's going to be essential that we continue to engage in those global conversations, that we continue to build on the progress we've already made. So we also think that supporting the administration's plans to develop strong and cost-effective federal regulations on methane emissions throughout the natural gas supply chain for new and existing sources is pretty important. Again, we need an energy mix that includes natural gas to help us to get to a clean energy future faster and more reliably. We are pleased that President Biden has recognized the vital role infrastructure plays in supporting the clean energy transition, and that he's committed to double the production of renewable energy from offshore wind by 2030. Finally, we're particularly pleased that the administration is committed to electric transportation. It's taking action itself. Really, when you think about the potential for aggressive rules around light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, restoring the California waiver, and electrifying the federal fleet. What an awesome announcement that they're going to electrify the entire federal fleet. That includes hundreds of thousands of light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, offering tremendous potential for electrification. And we look forward to partnering with the administration and to helping them with the federal fleet and to electrify that by building and optimizing the needed charging infrastructure to support that. The bottom line is that there are probably many legislative and regulatory tools that could be pursued to address climate change. And we're committed to working with the administration, Congress, and other stakeholders, like we always do, to explore all the options. I'll wrap up just by touching on the pandemic. And I think, as Tom noted, the pandemic has severely tested our nation, our communities, and the American people. Just as Congress is focused on ironing out, just this week, ironing out the details of what that next stimulus package might look like, we know that all 50 states continue to do their work and hold legislative sessions, and they will be throughout this year. We expect COVID-19 recovery. It's going to take center stage in Washington and in every state across the country. In Congress, we will continue to advocate something that's really important for our customers, and that's that lawmakers provide that additional $10 billion in funding for low-income customers through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program in the next COVID-related stimulus bill. And our request also is going forward, we know 2022 is going to be in great need for also fully funding that low income energy assistance. And we want that at a much higher level than it has been the last 2 years. In addition, I know that we urge Congress always to continue to support programs that really help the unemployed individuals, that have enabled small businesses to keep their doors open, make payroll, and continue to keep their businesses viable. And we know that's important for the economic recovery in front of us. At the state level, we're going to have many opportunities to find collaborative solutions that are going to help our customers recover and really going to set our communities on a path to economic recovery. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Phil Moeller.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Phil Moeller, Executive Vice President of the Business Operations Group and Regulatory Affairs, and it's my pleasure to join you today. As Tom mentioned in his introduction, and as you just heard from Brian, we are optimistic about the opportunities we have in front of us this year. In my talk today, I'll cover 6 areas: investing in smart energy infrastructure, key regulatory policy issues, bridging the digital divide, grid modernization activity, addressing wildfire risks, and securing the energy grid. Since 2010, EEI's members have invested more than $1 trillion to build smarter energy infrastructure and to integrate new generation. These investments also help to protect the energy grid from extreme weather and cyber attacks, help predict, mitigate, and prevent outages, and help companies respond to and restore electricity faster when outages do occur. And importantly, these investments continue to be central to our vision of a cleaner, smarter, stronger energy future. Delivering this future to customers and expanding the ways that clean energy is used depends upon the smarter energy infrastructure our members are deploying. Smart meters, for example, are a key building block of a more dynamic and more secure energy grid, and our members continue to deploy them throughout the country. Among their benefits, smart meters enable next generation energy efficiency measures that not only respond to how and when customers use energy, they help shape those patterns in the first place. To support our clean energy transition and the energy future our customers want and deserve, we need favorable public policies. First and foremost, we are focused on advocating for policies that enable us to get critical transmission and energy grid infrastructure built more quickly. The transmission system is key to increasing the integration of clean energy resources. It enhances the resilience of the grid, powers electric transportation, and facilitates the adoption of a broad array of smart technologies to better serve our customers. Importantly, it is also a primary component of meeting, again, the industry's clean energy goals. EEI's members are vital to transmission development, and they have invested in and developed cost-effective transmission for over 100 years. Transmission development is expected to be a key priority of the Biden administration as it focuses on this clean energy transition. And we're pleased to hear that President Biden's Energy Secretary nominee, Jennifer Granholm, expressed her interest in working with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, to develop more transmission while she had her confirmation hearing. To achieve our clean energy goals in the fastest and most cost-efficient manner, while also protecting and helping to facilitate the development of this critical infrastructure, there are critical areas that the administration can focus on to make progress. First, we need to take a more holistic view of transmission system needs, and we need to work to improve policies and processes to evaluate and promote the development of cost-effective interregional, multi-regional, or cross-connection transmission facilities. We also need reforms in transmission planning, cost allocation, permitting, siting, and generator interconnection to ensure that investments continue to be made at the regional and local level. Under its current legislative authority, FERC is long overdue in finalizing a proposed rule on reassessing transmission incentives. Finalizing the outstanding proposed rule would accomplish several priorities, including helping to push for increased deployment of transmission that meets certain goals and objectives, such as carbon reduction and resilience. Given the time needed to build new transmission infrastructure, it is imperative to move quickly to take stock of where we are, what is working, what is not, and what the needs are of each respective region throughout the country. We look forward to working with DOE, FERC, and the administration to get this critical energy infrastructure built more quickly. In addition to our focus on transmission at FERC, EEI will continue to advocate for wholesale electricity market reforms, as well as rate and regulatory reforms. We are advocating for the removal of regulatory and legislative barriers that limit member companies' opportunities to own or fully participate in the implementation of energy storage assets and other distributed energy resources. And we support federal, state, and local policies and programs that enable responsible data security. Sharing and confidentiality practices are essential to protect both customers and the grid, while allowing members to utilize advanced data analytics to leverage operational efficiencies and enhance the customer experience. At the state level, the policy focus will be on smarter energy infrastructure, as well as COVID-19 cost recovery, electric company projects and programs such as economic development, and the middle mile broadband set of issues. EEI also remains active on a range of other important regulatory issues, including securing favorable outcomes for member companies on a wide variety of environmental and natural resource policy issues. These include advocating for Clean Air Act programs that recognize our members' leadership on emissions reduction, working on vegetation management issues that impact reliability and wildfire prevention, and continuing to advance policies to protect wildlife. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted a deep inequity around the broadband access issue across this country. The digital divide is acutely visible, and America's electric companies are stepping up to help tackle this problem. Electric companies have long incorporated telecommunications equipment and fiber technology into their operations, particularly in rural areas, to support communications and to support real-time monitoring and controls for generation and transmission operations. Allowing electric companies to leverage these fiber investments to provide the middle mile broadband infrastructure in partnership with telecommunication companies and last mile internet providers is a win for all stakeholders, particularly those in underserved and unserved areas. As Tom mentioned, EEI's vision is customer focused, and one of the three main pillars is modernizing the energy grid to make it more dynamic, more resilient, and more secure. Fundamentally, the modern energy grid serves as the platform for clean energy deployment and the advanced technologies that enable distributed generation, microgrids, energy storage, demand response, electrification, and more. EEI and our members are working closely with state policymakers and regulators to develop policies that support investment in a resilient modern energy grid. Although there is much work still to be done, we are making outstanding progress. Tom talked about the historic 2020 hurricane season. Last year also brought unprecedented devastation from wildfires. I hail from the state of Washington, and it was horrifying to see the fires devastate so many areas of the West, especially parts of Oregon and California. As an industry, we're continuing to invest in mitigation, detection, and response efforts to reduce our wildfire risk. We continue to have great cooperation with our federal government partners, specifically the U.S. Forest Service, the Departments of Agriculture, Energy, and Interior, as well as state and local regulators as we undertake these efforts. The EEI CEO Wildfire Task Force and the ESCC Wildfire Working Group, which includes electric cooperatives and public power utilities, have focused on three major elements as part of our wildfire strategy: mitigation efforts, detection, and response. These efforts are not a one-time investment and will be part of our core industry-wide objectives for ensuring public safety for the foreseeable future. Collectively, the industry has improved its real-time situational awareness capabilities. We are investing heavily in sensors, high-definition cameras, and weather stations that are placed in the field to give companies near real-time conditions. Our Western companies have some of the most advanced weather tracking systems in the country. We are also coordinating with a variety of federal agencies through DOE to establish shared information platforms that will allow access to mapping tools, satellite data, fire spread modeling, and other analytics that will help drive real-time decisions and actions. Today, the ESCC is more engaged than ever before, working closely with our government partners to manage the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the relentless storms and wildfires, while ensuring that grid resilience and cybersecurity remain front and center as always. One of our greatest strengths as an industry is our ability to convene and adapt quickly to changing circumstances and challenging events. The recent SolarWinds incident demonstrated that sophisticated adversaries are constantly innovating and looking for new ways to breach our cyber defenses. It also highlighted the need for resilience and constant vigilance, and we look forward to continuing to work across our sector and with our government partners to protect some of our nation's most critical infrastructure. Fortunately, we have strong collaboration across our industry through EEI and the ESCC. We continue to share ideas and best practices to address these challenges. Initiatives like the ESCC's Cyber Mutual Assistance Program extend our industry's practice of sharing critical personnel and equipment for emergency response across the cyber realm. And this community has played an active role in the SolarWinds response. While the US government is responsible for national security, we as owners and operators of critical infrastructure play a significant role in their efforts to keep the nation secure. Since May, EEI and our member companies have been working with DOE to identify opportunities to enhance supply chain security for the bulk power system. We greatly appreciate President Biden's executive order that provides DOE with the time it needs to onboard the new officials who will be leading these supply chain security efforts. Given the complexities involved with implementing new bulk power supply chain regulations, we all benefit from taking this extra time to get these new regulations right. Electric companies already are subject to existing mandatory and enforceable NERC and FERC regulations, and steps are being taken to minimize the risk of these new supply chain regulations creating reliability challenges. Thank you for your attention. I will now turn it over to our final speaker before our Q&A session, Richard McMahon.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard McMahon, Senior Vice President of Energy Supply and Finance at the Edison Electric Institute. I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss our industry's financial performance, our ESG leadership, and our industry's work on natural gas sustainability. Welcome. As Tom described, EEI's members continue to lead the transformation to the lower carbon energy economy through our CapEx. Our industry remains the most capital-intensive industry in America, as EEI member companies continue to invest in clean energy resources and the infrastructure necessary to make the energy grid more robust, more dynamic, and more secure for all customers. Notwithstanding the impacts of COVID, the industry's decade-long capital expansion continued in 2020, reaching another year-over-year record of almost $140 billion. Our CapEx could be impacted by a variety of events, including the potential for tax increases. Although we haven't seen a tax proposal from the new administration, we have examined the Biden campaign tax proposals. We see the following proposals as potentially having the most impact on EEI members and their customers. Imposing a corporate AMT of 15%, that's an alternative minimum tax. Increasing the dividend rate to the new highest personal marginal rate of 39.6% from the current level of 20%, and increasing the corporate rate from 21% to 28%. We look forward to working with the administration and lawmakers as they consider changes to the corporate and individual tax codes. Looking at the capital allocation, a trend has emerged in recent years with increasing amounts of capital to transmission and distribution relative to generation. In 2020, almost 40% of the industry's CapEx went to transmission and distribution. Investment in the generation segment continues to be driven by the development of new renewable energy and natural gas generation. This trend aligns with research currently underway at EEI, examining CapEx associated with adaptation, hardening, and resilience. We look forward to sharing that with you soon. This includes CapEx for hardening against physical events such as storms and wildfires, as well as cyber resilience. We expect these trends to continue. As Tom mentioned, 2020 was a challenging year for our country, and our members responded robustly to the operational and financial challenges of COVID. The EEI index fell by 1.2% in 2020, but has produced a positive total return in 15 of the last 18 years. The industry produced returns greater than 10% in 12 of the 15 positive years and greater than 20% in 5 of the 15 positive years. The industry's fundamental outlook was little changed in 2020, with most companies pursuing investment programs focused on regulated operations and targeting earnings growth rates in the mid-single digits with similar dividend growth. Our industry extended its long-term trend and widespread and consistent dividend increases in 2020. A total of 34 companies increased or reinstated their dividend in 2020 compared to 37 in 2019. The percentage of companies that raised or reinstated their dividend in 2020 was 87%, aligning within the range over the prior 5 years. The industry's dividend payout ratio was 67.7% for the 12 months ended September 30th, 2020. This is leading among U.S. business sectors. From a credit perspective, the average rating remains strong at BBB+, with most companies having a stable or positive outlook. Overall, the underlying parent level quality of credit has experienced a steady strengthening over the past 10 years, having declined only modestly in the past 2 years. As you know, it's been almost 4 years since the creation of the EEI ESG template, partnering with our members and the investment community to create the first of its kind industry-wide ESG reporting template. We're very proud of it. The current EEI ESG template version 3 has been expanded and refined, adding a qualitative disclosure on cybersecurity governance and formally integrating the AGA's members, among other improvements. We're now working with our members and the financial community to enhance the diversity, equity, inclusion metrics and information that can be reported in the template. And we're on track to release version 3 of the template this year for our member companies to report in 2020 ESG data and information. Our ESG template provides an annual report card for EEI members to report their progress on clean energy, sustainability, and governance, and other crucial areas that increasingly influence shareholder actions. And the investment community and other stakeholders are using it to witness our progress. This chart shows we maintain ongoing contact with investors to refine the template based on their feedback to include new information, such as the diversity, equity, and inclusion information that I mentioned earlier. Even as the SEC contemplates regulations for ESG sustainability disclosure, our industry's comprehensive and concise ESG template supports transparency and helps ensure that our member companies are recognized for their outstanding work. And we believe our template will provide a good model going forward. For more than 2 years, EEI and the American Gas Association have worked together with investors, natural gas suppliers throughout the value chain, and other stakeholders to develop the Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative, a methane-intensive reporting protocol to provide greater consistency and transparency. Now, this is not meant to replace regulations, but to provide a meaningful tool to increase transparency and to facilitate improvements. As Brian Wolfe mentioned a few minutes ago, we support the administration's plans to develop strong and cost-effective federal regulations on methane emissions throughout the natural gas supply chain for both new and existing sources. Again, we need an energy mix that includes natural gas to help us get to a clean energy future faster and more reliably and affordably. We intend to include this information as part of our ESG template as well. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
I hope that our message today was clear. In 2021 and beyond, EEI and our member companies will remain focused on building a cleaner, smarter, and stronger energy future, and on delivering the safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy our customers need and deserve. As always, our goal is to advance favorable public policy. We have some big things we want to accomplish this year. We also know that impacting legislation and the regulatory process in both Washington and in the states is never easy. Many of us watched the historic presidential inauguration last month and were captivated by Amanda Gorman, our nation's first National Youth Poet Laureate. One line in her poem really stood out to me. It said, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." For me, Amanda's words encapsulate so much of America's promise and strength. And they epitomize how EEI and our member companies continually rededicate ourselves to serving our customers and the nation. We see bright lights all around us, in our talented and dedicated workers, in the opportunities for driving positive and bipartisan public policy, and above all, in the customers and communities we are so proud to serve. We have the duty and the honor to provide the electricity that makes our daily lives possible. We are proud and humbled to be this light for our customers and for America. Thank you again for joining us today. We will now transition to our Q&A session.
I'm Devin James, and I'll be the moderator for today's question and answer session. As I mentioned earlier, we are joined by Emily Fisher, who serves as the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary and Senior Vice President of Clean Energy, James, and Scott Aronson, who is the Vice President of Security and Preparedness at EEI. Questions can be submitted through the text box. Please keep your submissions to 2 to 3 sentences. Attendees can now begin submitting questions. I will kick off this session with Tom. Tom, in your opening remarks, broadband middle mile is listed as an industry priority for 2021. Do you anticipate investment in broadband middle mile to impact future electric company earnings and future growth?
Well, the investment so far in fiber is an investment in the reliability of the electric system. That says, in many places, there is additional capacity or the opportunity to build in more bandwidth so that we can partner with local internet service providers and be part of the solution to the digital divide that has become so apparent in this country, particularly during the pandemic. We have the support of a great many regulators and policymakers to be part of this solution. We look forward to doing that. We have a task force put together of CEOs and senior executives that's working on these opportunities. And again, I think we can be part of the middle mile broadband solution.
Great, thank you, Tom. So the next question I would like to ask is for Brian. What do you expect from the Congress on clean energy this year, given the razor-thin Democratic margins in both houses? Could a clean energy standard be included in a reconciliation package?
Thanks, Devin. I would say that one of our audience members today is very current on the workings and going on of Congress right now. The current reconciliation package that's originating in the House of Representatives is COVID related, and it's narrow to those provisions. But we do expect that the next package, which is going to be a recovery package, it's going to come in the form of an infrastructure package related to recovery, as well as a climate package. And that's likely to come as an origination of what's soon to be reintroduced at the end of this month, which is the Clean Futures Act. So that's likely to be introduced at the end of this month, first part of March. But that will really form the basis for climate provisions, tax policy related to clean energy, as well as electric transportation. And also what I mentioned earlier about those carbon-free technologies that I spoke about. So I just want to flag those for you to be able to watch out for that as it develops throughout this year. You know, our industry, EEI, has been meeting with members of Congress about our clean energy transformation, and we certainly look forward to working with them and the new administration to make this carbon-free future for us a reality for all of us and our customers, certainly.
Great, thank you, Brian. The next question is for Phil. Do you expect major changes from the FERC regarding RTO governance? And if so, would that result in less or more influence of the utilities as transmission owners? And what other changes do you expect when the Democrats have a majority on the FERC in the coming months?
Well, thank you, Devin, and thanks to the audience member who submitted that question. The good news is that the need for stakeholder reform is much more prevalent now than it has been. It's long overdue, particularly in PJM, and PJM started a process to analyze that. I don't expect major changes. I certainly hope for major changes, but that is something that's probably going to take a while. My hope is that the FERC will actually pay a lot more attention to this set of issues, because it is very frustrating for particularly the transmission owners and the load-serving entities of our member companies have their essentially their vote reduced in the stakeholder process or watered down. So we'll see how those reforms come. Again, there's progress being made on them. And the progress, if it does result in changes, I think will be good for the transmission owners and the load serving entities. Other changes that we expect from a Democratic leading FERC, well, right now, I think most people realize there are 2 Democrats, 3 Republicans on the commission. Commissioner Chatterjee's term is up at the end of June, although he could continue to serve until he's replaced. So that will modify the agenda and the aggressiveness, perhaps, of what Chairman Glick wants to do. He's made it clear that transmission reform is a high priority, so we're not exactly sure how that will play out, but at least it's good that he's focused on that. And as you've probably heard, he's interested in FERC having more of an environmental analysis of particularly pipeline projects and the impacts those projects will have on the environment. So with that, we expect to have a more active FERC, but until the Democrats get a majority on the commission, it will limit the ability to push through more divisive issues. Thank you, Devin.
And thank you, Phil. Okay, the next question I have is for Richard. Of the potential tax changes you mentioned, which, if any of these, seems likely to become law? And are there ways to mitigate the impacts of these proposed changes on the utility sector?
Thanks, Devin. Thanks for the question. As I said, I'll start by reiterating the fact that we have not seen a tax proposal from the new administration at this point. So what we're looking at is what was talked about during the campaign. So I think the 3 probably the most important aspects of tax there would be 2 that directly impact us and 1 that indirectly impacts us but impacts our shareholders. The first one would be the 15% AMT. I think the issue with that is that having an AMT more or less negates the benefits of all the CapEx that we're doing as a capital-intensive industry. So I think one way to address that would be to ensure that the AMT looks at things like the ITC and other different tax incentives that are put in place to foster capital investment, so that those don't have them negated by the fact that you have an alternative minimum tax. So we're looking at the composition and how the AMT interacts with that. The second one that directly impacts us would be the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. When the Tax Reform and Jobs Act was being discussed and debated, a lot of folks had that number at around 25%. That was back then in the previous administration. So there's probably going to be a discussion about what's the appropriate rate there. It also impacts international competitiveness and all of those other issues. So I think that's going to be the way that discussion goes. It's going to be what, if the rate is increased, how far does it go? It may not get up to 28%. And then finally, and very importantly, as the most capital intensive industry, we're in the capital markets all the time, every day. And so increasing the tax rate on dividends up to the highest marginal rate of 39.6% would really have an impact on cost of capital. So we think there's going to be a discussion around that. And this time around, it's not just CapEx, it's not just dividends, it's also capital gains. So in going down that path, it sort of disincentivizes equity investment and incentivizes debt. That isn't the way things have been going for many, many years. So I think there's going to be a good dialogue around that. We definitely would like to see, that our capital costs kept as low as possible, and that tax rate on dividends is the same. So that'll be very, very important to us, and something that'll impact all shareholders and all equity holders in general. So we're really working hard on all three of those things, and they're all very relevant and important to our industry.
Great. Thank you, Richard.
Sure.
The next question that I have is for Emily. Do you expect the EPA to take aggressive action regarding climate, assuming that legislation is unlikely? And if so, how would the EPA craft its regulatory actions to ensure that it would withstand court challenges and avoid going the way of the Clean Power Plan?
Thanks for the question, Devin. I guess I have to say, as a lawyer, you can never insure against court challenges, but could you design a program that might survive them? I think that will be the question for this EPA. Certainly, the fate of the Clean Power Plan has been the subject of much discussion since the elections, and then even more so since the DC Circuit vacated and remanded to EPA the Clean Power Plan replacement rule that was promulgated by the Trump administration, the Affordable Clean Energy situation where EPA has had the decks cleared, and we've gotten a little bit of guidance from the DC Circuit about what they think could be in one of those rules. And while that decision leaves EPA a lot of discretion, I have to tell you that I'm on the side of thinking that EPA probably won't promulgate Clean Power Plan 2.0. And that if they move forward with a rule, which they likely will, that it will probably be focused a little differently to get at those questions of defensibility. It might be useful just really quickly to remind ourselves that the Clean Power Plan took a very expansive approach to regulating the sector, looking at all emitting resources and really focusing on generation shifting. That was always the source of a lot of controversy. We never really got an answer to that when it was challenged initially, and the decision from just last month doesn't also really answer that question. The other thing that it included was, as a compliance tool, a very broad nationwide cap and trade program. For many reasons, I don't think this is the approach that this Environmental Protection Agency will take. You saw in the executive orders released by the Biden administration in the first week a clear focus on environmental justice. And environmental justice communities are not big fans of cap and trade programs because they don't ensure reductions from specific emitting units. So my general assessment right now, after spending some time talking to the transition team, is that they're going to be aggressive, but they are going to use first and foremost what I would refer to as traditional tools. I expect traditional tools on air, waste, and water so that they can reduce emissions, both greenhouse gas emissions and the traditional pollutant emissions that have near-term justice communities. They will come out with another 111 regulation for us. I think it'll be a little bit more narrow in scope. And obviously, we're looking forward and setting the stage now to engage with them as to how we think that should look and how to ensure that it's consistent with our overall fleet transition.
Great. Thank you, Emily. The next question that I do have is for Scott. How does the industry measure the improvements in its resilience and response to major weather events or cyber attacks? There does seem to be variability between states and regions in the effectiveness of response. What is EEI's role in identifying and building upon best practices?
Yeah, thanks, Devin. I really appreciate the question because it highlights a few important concepts, but I'll give the bottom line up front when this is with all due apologies to a Wall Street crowd that I think, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it and likes to quantify things, there isn't an easy way to quantify resilience. I have a ton of anecdotes, but measurables, as the question suggests, gets complicated trying to measure storm over storm, looking at regional differences, or in the event of cyber incidents, protecting against zero-day or black swan scenarios. So let me pick up on a couple of themes that I think are brought up in the question. First is this concept of resilience versus reliability. Reliability, I think, as everybody gets, is the ability to operate in normal conditions. That is, where SAIDI and SAFE and those reliability metrics come in. And resilience, on the other hand, is that ability to operate in abnormal conditions. We all do things to prevent a bad thing from happening. You prepare, you protect, you prevent, but incidents will happen. And so looking at the other side of the equation, that response and recovery, again, is where resilience comes in. I also appreciate that the question includes both major weather events and cyber incidents. To that, I would add things like wildfires and physical threats, civil unrest, and pandemics also. So really thinking about the resilience of the energy grid in the face of all hazards and focusing on effectiveness of response. And so the question talks about the effectiveness of response. What you've seen in this industry, particularly in give or take the last decade, and really certainly since Superstorm Sandy, has been a better coordination between and among all of the different regional mutual assistance groups and all of our security professionals. And so as far as EEI's role in identifying and building these best practices, really it's don't waste a crisis. Every one of these incidents is an opportunity to get better. And 2020, those of you who've done exercises before, you're told, don't fight the scenario. I think all of us want to fight the scenario that was 2020, right? It was ice storms, it was hurricanes, it was the derechos, it was wildfires, it was cyber incidents, there was civil unrest, it was a presidential election year, all with the backdrop of a pandemic. Anytime you would put that into an exercise, all the people just throw their hands up and say, no way. But because of a lot of the preparation in this industry over the last several years to work more coordinated, both as an industry and with government partners, I think we were in a much better place. And what we're going to do is take the experiences of 2020 and apply those to improvements. And we already have, again, sort of a target-rich environment, but how do we more effectively move large numbers of resources across and around the country so that we can nationalize that response? How do we look at things like supplies and equipment and share those a little bit more effectively? And then some of the unique attributes of wildfire response in particular, the Western companies are really looking at different ways that we can more effectively respond, both before fires occur and then certainly after they do, so that we can do the inspections and get the lights back on as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, thank you, Scott. The next question that I have for the panel is, and all of you, please weigh in. We initially wanted to ask each panelist their own question, but now in this round, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback. What do you view as the biggest opportunities and risks facing the industry under the Biden administration? For example, is a carbon-free power sector by 2035 feasible given the current pace of current technology?
Well, I'll get that started, Devin. I think the 2035 date that was a campaign indication, which really means to get to net zero by 2035, would be an incredibly difficult situation to handle for most of the companies in the industry. And I think that we are in a situation right now where, again, as was said earlier, we have done some tremendous reductions in carbon emissions, and we will continue to do that at a great pace. There is situations where we have to worry about the reliability and affordability of the system, because if we keep it affordable, we can bring on transportation even faster than if electricity rates would go up. And also the political acceptance goes up if it impacts rates. So far, we've been able to make those reductions while keeping rates at or below the level of inflation. And we are going to have to, on the reliability side, to make sure that we have the stability that can bring on additional renewables from, say, nuclear plants and natural gas plants. So I think that there'll be a lot of discussion over the 2035 date, and and maybe even over targets that would be closer in, like 2030. What would be, how far along can we get by 2030? That's going to be all part of the discussion that's both in the Congress and in the regulatory arena.
Yeah, Tom, let me just chime in there too, is, also earlier in my remarks, I mentioned to you all the carbon-free technology initiative that we pursued and partnered with environmental NGOs on to be able to illuminate the technologies that are going to be needed to address that last, say, 20% or more of carbon that's going to be left, that are going to be needed from these advanced technologies. So while we did get a down payment on those technologies in the energy bill that passed in the lame duck session of Congress last year, we're really looking now to set the stage for the budget that is coming up that Congress will be dealing with, as well as the administration putting forth their own budget, is to make sure that there are line items in there for appropriate levels of investment in these technologies. We know what takes it and what it'll take really to get to broader commercialization of some of these technologies. But if you think about it, when technologies are brought to commercialization initially, they're always still very expensive. And it takes a while for those technologies to penetrate within the economy and sectors in order to bring those costs down. So I think that we have to be able to look at that time horizon, be able to take those things into consideration. And I'm happy to hear policymakers using those same points as well to talk about what it will mean in the pathway to a carbon-free future.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Oh, sorry, I'll go for it.
I think the biggest general threat is that they don't understand our industry, and that's why we're working very hard to make sure that they do. Related to what Tom and Brian said, the progress that we're making, things such as the ESG initiative that EEI has, the natural gas supply sustainability initiative, the complexities of the network that Scott talked about, not only in terms of preparation, but also response. We need to make sure they understand that we are aggressively and proactively working on this set of issues. And that has if they fully understand that, and I think they will, they'll be less likely to impose other requirements or restrictions on us that don't make sense.
A quick add-in, sorry for interrupting you, Phil. I think that those are significant challenges, but they're also opportunities for us. And I think we are uniquely qualified to help policymakers understand what we need to do to get to zero, that we're aggressively moving in that direction, even while we're waiting for technologies that will get us all the way to zero to be developed. And that if you continue to move toward the decarbonization of the power sector, you really have the opportunity to decarbonize other sectors, and in particular, transportation.
Thank you, Emily. So the next question I would like to ask the panel: do you see more utilities taking advantage of securitization to lower their cost of capital?
Maybe I'll start. I think that securitization is one of the tools in the toolkit that our members have, working with regulators to help to mitigate costs associated with different expenses. Like, for example, many of the members, had significant impacts because of COVID. Both the cost that Scott was mentioning in his presentation with respect to PPEs and everything that they did to keep the lights on in the midst of a, unprecedented pandemic. There's those costs. There's also the costs associated with, the fact that, we've had delinquencies and uncollectible bills and all of those things. So it's just one tool in the toolkit that's available to our members and the regulators as they look at ways to get cost recovery, which is needed, but by the same token, avoid rate shock and avoid really hitting the customers now, particularly at a point where the economy is just getting back on its feet. So I think it's a valuable tool. It's going to be one of many tools that they look at. And I know that we'll be partnering with the financial community to bring those things about. So I think you'll see some of it for sure.
So Richard, because I know the next couple questions are going to go towards transmission. So while you're here, there's a lot of couple questions about tax we can just address very quickly. Can you provide any color on the timing of a potential tax legislation? And do you think that is going to be part of the recovery package or taken up separately?
Well, and I'll ask, the other panelists to weigh in too. But I just say this. I mean, I think that in recent years, the way tax bills have gotten through have been mostly through the reconciliation process. So there's going to be at least 2 reconciliations this year, right? And so I think there's a possibility that it could be taken up this year. Again, it depends. There's also the other side of this is that, in the midst of a major economic recovery period, sometimes that's not the best, most opportune time to increase taxes. So I think that, and that's really what we're talking about here. So I think that, there is a possibility it could happen this year as part of reconciliation more toward the end of the year. But it may or may not happen. So we'll see. As I said before, we haven't seen a proposal from the administration. The Secretary of Treasury has just got in place. Their team is getting put in place and so on. So I think that it's TBD at this point, but it could happen.
Thank you. Do other panelists want to comment on Richard's remarks?
Well, I think Richard's right on target. Basically, you've got a situation where the infrastructure package that Brian mentioned, which could contain climate provisions, so you would probably see some tax situations, tax provisions in that, like the tax credits for renewables or electric vehicles, et cetera, electric vehicle charging stations. I think the broader tax package that Richard mentioned will probably go separately and be later on in the year, may or may not get done this year.
Okay. So now we're going to shift to, there's several questions I said related to transmission. So I think the first one to kick off would be, are there transmission reform policies that EEI is advocating for?
Well, I'll jump in there. I've been a proponent of transmission my whole career, and I think it's heartening to see maybe in the last 4 or 5 weeks a slew of reports that have come out advocating for the need for a more robust transmission network. And so that in itself is a positive tenor to start these discussions. But I think the reality that most people realize is that the cleaner and greener grid that we all want, the bottleneck is the transmission system. And so as EEI, we have been supporting, again, clarity on the ROE issue, which has been muddled for the last several years. It's complex. It's not easy for FERC to fix, but I know they see it as a priority. In addition, we support generally speaking, the incentives that are required under the 2005 Act, but more specifically, focus on better planning at both the regional and the interregional levels that would have to be fostered by FERC. And then the tough part comes in the cost allocation of those facilities once the need is agreed to. So this will keep us very busy over the next couple of years. But again, we realize, and I think there's increasing overall awareness of the fact that transmission needs to be focused on to keep our clean and green revolution maintained.
Does anyone else want to comment on Phil's remarks before I ask another follow-up question? Okay.
I think Phil did a great job with it, Devin.
Okay, so this one's longer, but I think it's important, so bear with me. Most of the hundreds of megawatts of projects in the interconnection queue are renewables. Does EEI support substantial expansion of investments in both interconnections and in high voltage transmission that will accommodate the transfer of wind and solar between regions and to make offshore wind more viable?
Well, I don't want to dominate this discussion, but yes, we do. The hard part, though, is getting again, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, the planning, but specific to queue reform, it's a real mess because of the enormous number of megawatts lined up. But as we all know, a lot of those projects are actually phantom projects that will never be built. So it's up to the RTOs and working with FERC to work on queue reform, but at least there's a recognition that it's needed. There was a similar problem with queue backlogs about 11 years ago, and part of that faded because of some reforms, and part of it faded because the economy was stagnant and consumption didn't rise during that period. So it is possible, but it's going to take some creativity. At least there is a recognition of the problem now and the need to address it in order to move forward with more projects.
And Devin, I'd just add to what Phil said on the offshore component. Most of those offshore projects are partnerships with our members. So they're very intimately involved in it. And a lot of those interconnection and transmission issues are kind of being worked out as part of the project development. We're seeing that.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Panelists, do you think we have time for another question, or do you think we should?
Sure, we can do one more, Devin.
All right, let me see here. Okay. What are the implications of electrification trends for electric bills and the overall share of household income? How can the industry best prepare customers and regulators for what may be coming in this front?
Well, I happen to be a major proponent of electric transportation, for example, and I owned the very first electric vehicle that GM came out with, the EV1, and then subsequently the Bolt, and then the Tesla, and the second Tesla, or whatever. And I've got to tell you, I plug in regularly my EV, and I do it at night, and I do it off peak, and don't notice a whole lot of difference in the electricity bills. You do see the savings that you get from not going to a gas station and refueling your vehicle there. So I really think that, with increased addition of electric vehicles, obviously there's going to have to be a lot of customer education that goes along with it. There's a brand new day these days with respect to the automobile industry and how committed they are. We see in the manufacturing sector, too, a lot of electrification going on in the building side of the equation. So I think it's a very, very exciting time for our industry. Yes, we're going to have to be communicating a lot with the customers about this increasing electrification, but also with increasing energy efficiency, which I think is going to continue to happen. Bills may not be affected all that much.
EPRI put out a study a couple of years ago that showed the more electrification, especially with transportation, would actually lower a household's energy bills in total by something over $1,000 a year on average. So we need to make sure that, as Tom mentioned, with charging off peak, we need to work with regulators for them to see the bigger picture of how this impacts a family's bottom line, and also send the right price signals so that as we electrify the economy, especially if we use more during off-peak, it's win-win-win. It's more revenue, it's a cleaner environment, and the existing infrastructure can deliver that. So we've got our work to do, but it's very promising.
Yeah, I just want to add one point, Phil, because Tom made a great point with regard to broader electrification, but our member companies are really leading the way. We're almost at $3 billion in infrastructure investment related to electrification. So for years now, our companies have been engaged with industrial processes. When you think about port and airport electrification as well, we now have so many movements across the country related to our own industry and electrifying our own fleets. But then you've also seen the Biden administration announcement about electrifying the federal fleet. So not only do you see that with corporate fleets, like FedEx, UPS, Amazon. Amazon's a first mover in this space as well. But we're just going to see more and more of this, particularly throughout the policies that we're going to see originating this year. There are going to be many policies related to the advancement, as Phil pointed out, of broader electrification.
Well said on all of you, by all of you. And I think that you get a flavor from our whole presentation about what an incredibly exciting time this is for our industry. We are not only going to be the Energy of first resort. We are also going to certainly be the solution to climate change and a whole lot of other exciting issues too in the future. So broadband, et cetera. So we cannot tell you how much we appreciate the partnership of the financial community. And on all these issues, we work closely with you as well as on the financial health of the industry. So again, we look forward to a very, very exciting 2021. And thank you for all that you're doing for us and for your partnership.